What if the greatest conqueror in human history, the man who built an empire larger than Rome at its peak, didn't die in 1227, but lived another 20 years to finish what he started? Tonight, we explore a world where Khan's iron will doesn't break at age 65, where the Mongol tide doesn't pause at the gates of Europe, and where the map of our world is redrawn by hooves thundering across continents that thought themselves safe. August 1227. Somewhere in the mountains of China, in a campaign tent surrounded by his generals and sons, the great Khan lies dying. He's conquered everything from Korea to the sea. He slaughtered millions and united the fractured Mongol tribes into the most terrifying military force the world has ever seen. His empire spans nearly 12 million square miles, and still, as his breath grows shallow, his eyes turn westward, toward lands he'll never reach. In our timeline, he dies there, possibly from injuries sustained falling from his horse, possibly from illness. The sources conflict, shrouded in the mystery the Mongols cultivated around their leader's death. What we know for certain is that his death changes everything. His sons divide the empire. The unity fractures. Europe gets a reprieve it doesn't deserve and will never fully appreciate. But what if the fall never happened? What if the illness passed? What if that legendary constitution, forged in the brutal winters of the Mongolian steppes and tempered by 6 decades of constant warfare, held strong for just 20 more years? Imagine Khan in 1228, 66 years old and weathered like ancient leather but alive, still sharp, still hungry. In our world, his death threw the Mongol succession into chaos, eventually became Great Khan, but not before crucial years were lost to political maneuvering. In this world, there's no succession crisis. There's only the Khan, and his will is still absolute. He doesn't rest. Rest is for the weak, for the settled peoples who grow fat behind their walls. He spent his entire life in the saddle, and he'll die there if the eternal blue sky wills it. But not yet. Not while there are still kingdoms to humble, armies to break, cities to burn. First, he turns his full attention to China. The Jin dynasty is already crumbling, but the Song dynasty to the south, wealthy, sophisticated, massive, still stands. In our timeline, it took his grandsons another 50 years to finally conquer the Song. But Khan doesn't have patience for 50-year campaigns. He has something better: time, experience, and the complete loyalty of the greatest military machine ever assembled. By 1230, Mongol forces are pouring into Song territory with a coordination and ferocity the Chinese have never witnessed. The Khan has learned from every siege, every battle, every fortress that ever slowed him down. He's incorporated Chinese engineers, Persian siege experts, captured European craftsmen. His armies don't just ride. They adapt, they innovate, they perfect the art of total war. The Song capital of Hangzhou, that jewel of civilization, that city of poets and philosophers and million souls, falls in 1233. Not in 1279 as it did in our world, but 46 years earlier, while the Khan himself watches from horseback, his face impassive as the greatest city in the world burns. China, unified under Mongol rule a generation ahead of schedule, becomes the engine that will drive the Khan's final campaigns. Because China was never his ultimate goal, it was a means to an end. The real prize lies west. In 1234, with China secured and tributary kingdoms from Korea to Tibet sending their wealth to feed his war machine, Khan turns his gaze toward Europe. His generals have already reported back from their reconnaissance raids into Poland and Hungary. They've told him about the fractured kingdoms, the knights in their heavy armor, the cities rich with plunder. They've told him it would be easy. And Khan believes them. The Golden Horde that descends on Eastern Europe in 1235 isn't the divided force that invaded in our timeline. This is the full weight of Mongol power, commanded by the Khan himself, backed by the inexhaustible resources of a completely conquered China. 300,000 horsemen, the most disciplined cavalry force ever assembled, supported by siege engines and Chinese fire weapons that Europe has never imagined. Poland falls in weeks. The flower of Polish chivalry dies but this time there's no mysterious Mongol withdrawal, no succession crisis calling the armies home. Hungary becomes a charnel house. Bela IV flees west, begging for help that will never come in time. The Mongol scouts reach Vienna by 1236. Europe is paralyzed with terror. Tales spread faster than the horsemen themselves. Stories of cities reduced to pyramids of skulls, of rivers running red for days, of an unstoppable tide of warriors who can shoot arrows with impossible accuracy while riding at full gallop. The Mongols have become the apocalypse made flesh, the scourge of God, Judgment Day on horseback. Pope Gregory IX calls for a crusade, but the crowned heads of Europe can barely comprehend what they're facing. This isn't a religious war they can understand. This isn't an enemy that wants territory or tribute in the traditional sense. The Mongols want submission, absolute, total, humiliating submission. Kneel and send your sons as hostages, your daughters as tribute, your wealth as acknowledgement of the Khan's supremacy. Resist, and your city becomes dust and memory. The Holy Roman Empire mobilizes, but European feudalism is catastrophically unsuited to fight the Mongol way of war. Knights in armor, trained for individual glory and tournaments, face disciplined units executing tactical retreats and envelopments with mechanical precision. Castles that took generations to build fall to siege weapons operated by engineers who learned their craft, breaking the fortifications of China and Persia. By 1238, Khan's armies are camped outside Paris. The French king, Louis IX, saint in our timeline, terrified sovereign in this one, watches from the walls as Mongol standards flutter in the wind. The Khan doesn't assault immediately. He never does. He sends envoys with a simple message: submit or die. The choice is yours, but choose quickly. My patience is not infinite. Some cities surrender. They're spared the worst of it, merely occupied, taxed into poverty, their nobilities replaced with Mongol administrators. Others resist. Their fate serves as lessons written in fire and blood across the European landscape. But here's what few expect. Khan doesn't want to destroy Europe. He wants to own it, use it. The man who rose from nothing on the Mongolian steppes understands value. European craftsmen, Mediterranean trade routes, the wealth of Italian city-states. These are tools to be incorporated into his empire, not obliterated. By 1240, the Mongol Empire stretches from the Pacific to the Atlantic. It's incomprehensible in scale. 1 in 4 humans alive bows to the Khan's authority. The Silk Road doesn't just connect east and west. It is the world's central highway, protected by Mongol law, traveled by merchants who can journey from Beijing to Venice without crossing a hostile border. This is the pax on a scale our timeline never witnessed. And like all peace imposed by conquest, it's built on mountains of corpses. The cultural consequences are staggering. Islam, which in our world survived and eventually converted many Mongols, is here systematically suppressed in its heartlands. Baghdad has already fallen in our timeline, but now Mecca and Medina bow to the Khan. Christianity fares little better. The Pope becomes a vassal, required to send tribute and acknowledge Mongol supremacy. The great religions of the world learn that faith offers no protection against arrows. But trade flourishes beyond imagination. Technologies that took centuries to travel from east to west in our world now spread in decades. Chinese printing presses arrive in Europe by 1245. Gunpowder weapons, no longer secrets, revolutionize warfare everywhere. Medical knowledge, mathematical innovations, astronomical instruments, they flow along routes protected by Mongol law and enforced by Mongol terror. The Renaissance doesn't wait for the fall of Constantinople. It explodes early, driven by this forced exchange of ideas. But it's born in a world where no kingdom is truly sovereign, where all culture exists at the sufferance of an aging conqueror who rules from a mobile court that moves with the seasons. Khan in his 70s is a figure of myth and nightmare. He's the eternal warrior, the man who cannot die, the force of nature that has reshaped the world. His sons and grandsons, who in our timeline divided his empire and founded their own dynasties, here remain subordinate, generals in his endless campaigns. Some whisper that this is unnatural, that one man holding such power for so long poisons the very structure of the empire. But none dare say it loudly. When the Khan finally dies in 1247, age 85, having lived those extra 20 years, the world he leaves behind is unrecognizable from our own. The succession crisis that finally comes is catastrophic precisely because it was delayed so long. His empire doesn't slowly fragment over generations. It explodes in a single spasm of violence as his sons and grandsons, middle-aged men who have waited their entire lives for power, turn on each other with the ferocity their father taught them. The wars of Mongol succession make the Crusades look like border skirmishes. Europe, exhausted and occupied, tries to reassert independence and is crushed again by whichever faction controls the Western territories. China fragments and reunifies twice in 10 years. The Middle East becomes a battlefield where different Mongol claimants use local populations as fodder. By 1260, the unified empire is gone, shattered into competing khanates as it was in our timeline. But these khanates are larger, more powerful, more deeply embedded in the territories they control. The damage is more extensive. The death toll, already apocalyptic from the initial conquests, climbs higher still. Yet something survives that never existed in our world, a memory of global unity, however brutal, a recognition that the world is smaller than anyone thought. That distance is no defense. that walls and mountains and seas cannot protect you from a determined conqueror with the resources of a continent. The world that emerges from the Mongol century is more connected, more cynical, more aware of its own fragility. The great kingdoms of Europe never quite recover their medieval confidence. They've been conquered, humiliated, shown that their god and their knights and their stone castles mean nothing against superior tactics and absolute ruthlessness. The psychological wound changes Western civilization at its core. In the East, Chinese resentment of Mongol rule burns deeper and longer because it lasted 20 more years. When the Ming dynasty finally rises to throw off the foreign yoke, they do so with a xenophobia that will shape Chinese policy for centuries. Walls built higher, foreigners trusted less, the memory of conquest seared into the cultural consciousness. This is the legacy of 20 extra years. Not just more death, though there is plenty of that. Not just more conquest, though continents bow that might have stayed free. It's a fundamental shift in human understanding of power, distance, and the terrible things that become possible when military genius combines with absolute will. In our timeline, Khan died before his work was finished and the world breathed again. Europe survived to fight its own wars, develop its own path. China eventually expelled the Mongols. Islam recovered and flourished. The empire fragmented, and in that fragmentation, diversity survived. But in this darker timeline, the Khan had time to finish what he started. Time to see his standards fly over every capital from Beijing to Paris. Time to create a world unified by force and fear, where his law was the only law, his peace the only peace. And perhaps that's the terrible truth history whispers across the centuries. That unity imposed by conquest, no matter how efficient, no matter how prosperous the trade routes or advanced the technology, always rests on a foundation of bones. That empires built by one man's genius die with that man, no matter how long he lives. That the human spirit resists domination even when resistance means death. Khan reshaped the world with 65 years. With 85, he would have broken it entirely, and the pieces, when they finally shattered, would have cut deeper and bled longer than anyone could imagine. Sometimes, mercy wears the face of mortality. Sometimes, the greatest gift history gives us is that even conquerors die.